There is a reason why the oldest inhabited cultures on the planet developed rituals for the spaces where people live. Those rituals were not decorative. They were not ceremonial in the sense of being disconnected from practical life. They were responses to something that every human culture across every continent recognized independently and without coordination, that the energy inside a home is not static, that it moves, that it collects, that it can become hostile, and that certain specific conditions within a space consistently produce outcomes in the people who inhabit it that go beyond what furniture placement or aesthetics alone could explain. The Chinese practice of Feng Shui is the most systematically developed of these traditions, and it is also the one most frequently reduced, in the modern West, to a matter of interior decoration. That reduction is the source of most of the confusion about what Feng Shui actually does, and why the changes it prescribes have effects that persist long after the initial arrangement. Feng Shui is approximately 3,000 years old in its formalized written tradition, and considerably older in its oral and observed practice. Its foundational premise is that qi, the life force that animates all living things and permeates all space, moves through a home in patterns that are directly shaped by the physical arrangement of the space. When qi moves well, freely and in balanced circulation through a home, the people in that home experience health, clarity, ease of relationship, and a quality of rest that is specific and measurable. When qi is blocked, compressed, forced into attacking angles, made to stagnate in dark corners, or amplified by reflective surfaces or structural errors, the people in that home experience the effects of that distortion in their bodies, their relationships, their sleep, their finances, and their sense of safety. The ancient practitioners who documented these effects did not have the vocabulary of neuroscience or environmental psychology, but the phenomena they were describing are now understood and confirmed through research disciplines that did not exist when the original observations were made. The concept of sha qi, which translates approximately as killing breath or attacking energy, is specific to the configurations in Feng Shui that generate hostile energy rather than benign energy. Sha qi is not a vague or metaphorical concept. It describes a real and documented energetic condition produced by certain spatial relationships, and its effects on the people who live in it are consistent enough that Feng Shui practitioners across centuries and across geographic regions documented identical outcomes from identical configurations. Sharp angles pointing at a bed, a door aligned with another door in a direct line of force, a mirror reflecting a sleeping person, a staircase pointing at an entrance, broken or non-functional objects kept in the living space. Each of these produces a characteristic set of effects in the people exposed to them, and the removal or correction of each one produces a consistent improvement in the same categories of experience that were disrupted. The concept that Western discourse sometimes summarizes as evil spirits, a phrase that carries different cultural weight in different contexts, refers in the Chinese and broader East Asian Feng Shui tradition to a more precise phenomenon, the accumulation of si qi, or dead breath, and the conditions that allow entities in the spirit realm, whether understood as actual presences or as the residual energetic imprint of suffering and misfortune, to find purchase in a living space. Every traditional culture on the planet has a version of this understanding. The Japanese call it negative spiritual influence. The Hindu tradition describes it through the concept of vastu doshas. Indigenous American traditions speak of heavy or dark energy that collects in certain spaces. The specific vocabulary differs, but the underlying description is consistent. Spaces that are dark, cluttered, blocked, broken, stagnant, or energetically misaligned become hospitable to presences and influences that no person would choose to live with. The 6 changes described in this video require no money. They require only understanding and the willingness to act on that understanding. The first change concerns the front door and the approach to it. In Feng Shui, the front door is called the mouth of qi. It is the primary point through which energy enters the home, and its condition determines the quality of the energy that does so. A front door that is blocked, dark, obstructed by objects in front of it or beside it, surrounded by dead plants or broken fixtures, facing an obstacle directly, or approached by a pathway that does not allow energy to arrive in a smooth and balanced curve, does not allow healthy qi to enter the home in sufficient quantity. What it does allow to enter is the sha qi that the obstructions generate and the si qi that accumulates in blocked, dark, stagnant approaches. The practical application of this principle costs nothing. Clear everything from in front of the door that does not serve a specific and functional purpose. Remove dead plants from the entrance area. Remove items stored against the outside of the door. Ensure that the path to the door, whether a walkway, a hallway, or a porch, is as clear and as well lit as it can be made within the existing structure. If there's a bulb burned out in an entrance fixture, replace it. If there's a mat at the door that is worn, dirty, or frayed, remove it. If there's a wind chime, a knocker, a decorative element at the entrance that is broken or non-functioning, repair it or remove it. The logic of this is both energetically grounded and empirically verifiable. The condition of an entrance sets the psychological and energetic tone for everything that follows it. A home entered through a clear, clean, well-lit approach communicates a fundamentally different message to both the nervous system and the energy field of the person walking through it than a home entered through a blocked, dark, neglected threshold. The ancient Feng Shui masters who documented this were observing the same truth that environmental psychologists document today. Transition spaces determine the emotional and energetic register of the spaces they lead into. The second change concerns the position of the bed, and it is the one that has the most consistently documented effect on sleep, on psychological safety, and on the category of nighttime disturbance that traditional cultures universally describe as the work of entities that exploit the vulnerability of the sleeping state. In Feng Shui, the ideal position for a bed is called the commanding position. In the commanding position, the sleeper can see the door from their sleeping position without being directly in line with it. The bed is against a solid wall. There is no direct line of force from the door to the sleeping person. And critically, the feet of the sleeper do not point directly toward the door. The position in which the feet point directly toward the door is called the coffin position in the Chinese tradition, and it is avoided with the same consistency across multiple Asian cultures that the underlying observation demands. The reason given in the traditional literature is that this is the position in which the dead are carried out of a room, feet first, through the doorway, and that sleeping in this configuration creates an energetic resonance with death and with the spirit world that is not compatible with the safety or the rest of the person in the bed. The modern psychological interpretation is equally compelling. The human nervous system processes the open doorway as a potential source of threat. Lying with feet pointed at the door, in a position where the body is maximally exposed to whatever might come through that opening, keeps the autonomic nervous system in a low-level state of alert throughout the night, disrupting the depth and quality of sleep in ways that accumulate into fatigue, anxiety, and eventually the kinds of psychological fragility that traditional cultures describe as spiritual vulnerability. Moving a bed to the commanding position costs nothing. It requires moving furniture within the existing room. In some rooms, the commanding position is immediately obvious once the principle is understood. In others, it requires some trial and error. The consistent practice, reported by everyone from traditional Feng Shui practitioners to contemporary sleep researchers, is that people who move their bed into the commanding position experience an immediate and often dramatic improvement in sleep quality, in the feeling of safety at night, and in the general sense of energetic well-being in the room. The disappearance of nightmares, of the sense of being watched during sleep, and of the generalized unease that accumulates in rooms where sleep is consistently poor is among the most commonly reported outcomes of this single change. The third change uses sound, and it has roots in virtually every spiritual and energetic tradition that has ever been documented. The principle is this: energy that is stagnant does not move. It sits. It accumulates. It becomes heavy, dark, and eventually hostile. Sound breaks it. The mechanics of this are understood in modern physics through the relationship between acoustic vibration and matter, and they were understood intuitively in traditional cultures through the simple observation that spaces which had been recently filled with live music, prayer, communal song, or even vigorous conversation felt different from spaces that had been quiet and unoccupied for long periods. The difference was not imagined. It was consistent enough to be embedded in ritual practice across cultures that had no contact with each other. The Feng Shui application of this principle is called sound cleansing, and the most basic version of it requires nothing more than the hands. Walk slowly through each room of the home, paying particular attention to corners, the areas under furniture, the spaces behind doors, and any areas that feel energetically heavy or oppressive. In each of those areas, clap sharply 3 times. The clap should be crisp and definitive, not gentle. The purpose is to create a sudden acoustic disruption in the stagnant energy that has accumulated in that space. After clapping in a corner, pause. Notice whether the air feels different. In corners and closed spaces where significant sha-qi or si-qi has accumulated, there is often a perceptible shift in the quality of the space immediately following the sound. Traditional practitioners sometimes use bells, singing bowls, or other instruments to accomplish the same effect, but the hands are sufficient, they are free, and they are always available. This practice should be done systematically and deliberately, moving through each room in the same direction, covering every corner and every area where energy might have collected without being disturbed. The recommended Feng Shui direction for moving through a space during cleansing is counterclockwise, a direction that is understood in the tradition to assist in the release and dispersal of accumulated negative energy, rather than in its concentration. The entire process for an average home takes between 15 and 30 minutes and can be repeated as often as needed, with the traditional recommendation being once per month as maintenance and immediately following any period of significant stress, illness, conflict, or grief that has occurred within the home. The fourth change addresses mirrors, which are among the most energetically powerful objects in any home and among the most consistently misplaced. In Feng Shui, a mirror is understood to double whatever it reflects. If it reflects a beautiful garden, it doubles the beneficial energy of that view. If it reflects a bed, it doubles the energy of the sleeping person, which in practice means that it amplifies the person's energetic field during sleep in a way that prevents the system from fully quieting into rest. If it reflects a door, it sends the entering qi back out before it can circulate through the home. If it reflects another mirror, it creates an infinite loop of energy that is not harmonious. The specific mirror positions that Feng Shui identifies as generative of negative energy and spiritual vulnerability are consistent across the tradition and across centuries of practice. A mirror that faces the bed is the most problematic. Traditional Chinese belief, consistent with the broader East Asian interpretation, holds that the spirit partially separates from the body during sleep as part of the natural process of rest and restoration, and that a mirror facing the bed creates a reflection that the returning spirit may not immediately recognize as its own, causing confusion and disturbance. The more materially grounded interpretation is equally valid. Any source of light or movement reflected in a mirror visible from the sleeping position will be registered by the sleeping brain as a potential stimulus, disrupting the depth and continuity of sleep. A mirror facing the bed should be moved, covered, or repositioned so that it does not reflect the sleeping person from any resting position on the bed. This costs nothing to do and has documented effects on sleep quality that appear within the first night of the change. Mirrors facing the front door send qi back out the entrance before it can enter the home. Mirrors facing each other create energetic loops that the tradition associates with confusion, repetitive patterns of difficulty, and the kind of circular stagnation that feels in daily life as the sense of going through the same problems repeatedly without resolution. Assessing the mirrors in a home and moving those that are in the positions that tradition identifies as problematic requires no resources beyond the time and attention to do it. The fifth change involves the removal of broken, non-functioning, and dead things from the living space. This is the principle that has the greatest conceptual distance from Western cultural norms around attachment to objects, which makes it the most difficult for many people to actually implement despite requiring no financial investment whatsoever. In Feng Shui, a broken clock that has stopped working does not simply represent a clock that needs a battery. It represents time that has stopped in that space, a frozen and stagnant energy signature that permeates the area around the object and the psyche of the people who live with it. A cracked mirror does not simply represent a minor cosmetic imperfection. It represents a fractured reflection, a disrupted energetic field, and in the traditional understanding, 7 years of difficulty, which is not superstition but rather the empirically observed outcome of living in a space where the primary reflective surface presents a distorted and broken image. Dead plants are perhaps the clearest example of this principle. A living plant brings living energy into a space. Its presence is an active contribution to the qi of the room. Dead or dying plant does the precise opposite. It contributes psi qi, dead energy, to the space in proportion to its size, the degree of its decay, and the length of time it has been allowed to remain in that state. A shelf of dead succulents, a wilted arrangement that has not been replaced, a tree in a corner that stopped producing new growth months ago. Each of these is a source of stagnant, dying energy in the room where it sits, and each of them is an invitation, in the traditional understanding, to the kinds of presences that are associated with decay and endings. The practical application of this principle is not the encouragement of frequent purchases. It is the opposite. Walk through each room of the home with a specific intention, to identify everything that is broken, non-functioning, dead, or in a state of decay. A drawer that will not close properly, a faucet that drips, a clock that has stopped, a plant that is dead or beyond recovery, a piece of furniture that is broken and not being repaired, a stack of items that have not been touched or used in years. In Feng Shui, each of these represents a site of stagnant or decaying energy in the home. Removing them, repairing them if repair is feasible and genuinely intended, or simply discarding what cannot be restored is one of the most powerful single acts available to a person seeking to improve the energetic quality of their living space. The cost is zero. The effect on how the home feels and on how the people in it relate to each other and navigate their daily experience is substantial enough to be noticed within days of implementation. The fifth change uses salt, which has been recognized as a spiritual purifier in virtually every culture that has used it since its discovery. The Hebrew tradition used salt as a covenant substance, a symbol of permanence and protection against corruption. The Japanese tradition of sumo wrestling retains the practice of throwing salt to purify a space before a contest. Salt is scattered at Japanese funerals to prevent the spirit of the deceased from following the living home. Salt is used in Catholic rites of exorcism and purification. In Haitian Vodou, in Native American traditions, in European folk practice, and in the practice of Western occultism, salt is consistently understood as a substance that absorbs negative energy, disrupts the conditions that allow malevolent presences to establish themselves, and creates a boundary that hostile forces do not easily cross. In Feng Shui and in the broader Chinese spiritual tradition, coarse salt, specifically sea salt or rock salt, rather than the refined table variety, is used to clear stagnant and negative energy from the corners of rooms, from thresholds, and from spaces where sha qi or si qi has become particularly concentrated. The practice is simple. Place a small amount of coarse salt in each of the 4 corners of the main living areas of the home. In rooms where the heaviest energy is concentrated, add salt to each corner of that room specifically. Leave the salt in place for 24 to 48 hours. During that period, the salt absorbs the negative energy that has accumulated in those areas. At the end of the period, collect the salt carefully, without touching it with bare hands if possible. Wrap it in paper and discard it outside of the home. Do not reuse the salt that has been used for this purpose. Replace it with fresh salt if the practice is to be continued. The corners of a room are energetically significant in Feng Shui because corners are where qi tends to collect and stagnate when its circulation through the room is not fully supported by the arrangement of the space. In a well-arranged room, energy moves in a smooth and relatively balanced circuit. In a room where the arrangement creates obstructions or forcing angles, energy accumulates in the corners in a way that becomes progressively heavier and more stagnant over time. Salt placed in those corners has the effect, understood both traditionally and in the contemporary understanding of energetic hygiene, of drawing that accumulated energy out of the corner and into itself. The change in how a room feels after this practice is completed is one of the most commonly reported and most consistently striking results of any zero-cost Feng Shui intervention. The 6 changes described here share a common logic, and that logic extends the discussion beyond the individual interventions to the underlying question of why these practices work and why they have been maintained across thousands of years and dozens of distinct cultural traditions. The answer that emerges from both the traditional literature and from the contemporary research that has begun to examine these phenomena is that the physical arrangement and condition of a living space functions as a field, an energetic environment that is in continuous interaction with the human beings who inhabit it. That field can be beneficial, supportive, and protective. It can also be hostile, disruptive, and, in the traditional vocabulary, spiritually dangerous. The choice between those 2 conditions is not primarily a matter of how much money is spent on the space. It is a matter of how much understanding and attention is brought to it. The front door determines what enters the home. The position of the bed determines the quality of rest and the degree of vulnerability during sleep. Sound breaks up what has stagnated too long in corners and closed spaces. Mirrors amplify or disrupt depending on what they reflect and where they are placed. Broken and dead things accumulate the energies of malfunction and decay and infect the spaces around them. Salt, used deliberately and discarded with intention, absorbs what has collected beyond the reach of the other interventions. None of these changes requires a purchase. All of them require the recognition that the space in which a person lives is not passive, that it is not neutral, and that the attention brought to it is one of the most consequential choices available in daily life. The tradition of Feng Shui has survived 3,000 years not because it is decorative or culturally specific or metaphorically appealing, but because the changes it prescribes produce results that are real enough, consistent enough, and important enough to be worth preserving and passing down across generations. The people who first developed these observations were not mystics disconnected from practical life. They were people who paid close attention to what happened to human beings in different kinds of spaces, who recorded what they found with great care, and who translated their findings into a set of practical interventions that have been refined through 3 millennia of application. What those interventions require most is not money, and it is not equipment, and it is not any credential or specialized knowledge. It is the willingness to look at the space in which you live with the same seriousness and attention that the tradition has always brought to it, and to make the changes that serious attention reveals are necessary.